BC, let's get into Nebraska a little bit here. Obviously, the injury news kind of dominated the press conference yesterday, despite it only being kind of a 2-minute snippet there. Just your initial thoughts on what we kind of considered to be a fairly deep offensive line group. How do you feel about that this morning versus last week?
First off, my initial thoughts are pain for Teddy. I mean, this is a young guy who's really put in the grind, had his body in the best shape it had ever been in. He had really followed, I think, the Benhart method from last year with Corey Campbell and Christian Coggin, where you just saw that, man, he looks lean. Let's see where this goes. And so I was starting to hear those murmurs on Monday that something had happened, and you're hoping the first things you hear aren't right, but it turned out to be so. So I feel terrible for him. I think this is the third or fourth one now, and he's just battled to come back every time. Things were really going his way, and then you get this, and you don't even get to play some games. So that absolutely stinks. And then my second thought is it's that reminder, and we get it, unfortunately, about every fall camp at some point. There's like that stretch of a few days where just bad stuff sort of happens. Guys go down. It's football. You're reminded there's that cruel layer to the sport. And you're also reminded that sometimes you'll be talking in May or June or July about all this depth here and there. And one guy goes down, and that can really shift everything in a hurry. Like, I mean, we don't just say, oh, they don't have depth now, but you start to look at that particular position in a different light, and you're like, oh man, okay, now it's okay. Is Corcoran ready to go? Is he healthy? Like, how far has Gunnar Gatula progressed? What's up with Tyler Knack, by the way? I guess we haven't talked enough about him. So all these like other thoughts start to come into your head that previously seemed sort of on the back burner.
Hey, it's interesting listening to the MJ Sherman clip, because yesterday we got into this thing about development, and I was using Coach McGuire and Coach Dvorak as kind of the poster children for development at a position year over year. And how interesting is it, or do you think we realize that a couple of guys that transferred in where some negative talk started about whether it was Judy coming over from A&M or MJ Sherman, like what's taken so long, like maybe it's not another man's treasures or the trash treasure thing, where both those guys, or the two aforementioned, are two pretty good examples of guys that have kind of stayed with it, that could turn out to have the impact that we thought they could have had when they first came into the program.
Definitely. And the thing to remember too is, but in both cases, they had not played many college snaps actually.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so last year was sort of their runway into that. I'm sure MJ, there were times when it looked like MJ might have, like if you get into the PFF snap counts and all that, it looked like it might take off more than it did. But it kind of settled, and I can't remember. He might have been in the 150, something like that. But that was more than he had at Georgia at any point by a ways. And so, yeah, he's one of those guys similar to Corcoran, actually. Different storylines, of course, because Corcoran had the injury, but where people kind of forgot about him. I think during the spring didn't talk much about him. But yet he's one of those veteran college football guys who still has a lot of motivation, still has gas in the tank, and I think is really important to this team. I mean, obviously Princewell's there, and we're fired up about what he can be if he can stay healthy, but he's got to stay healthy. And MJ Sherman is really important, not just for depth, but I think to push Princewell and be one of the main guys there. So it was good that he was up front yesterday, and I think people see he's a very focused individual who, he never thought about leaving, as he said at one point, this program. He's here and he wants to be a part of it. He wants to get it to be successful. So I think he's got good leadership qualities, and I would not forget about him. And then Elijah Judy, just going off what T. Knight says about him, it does really seem like he's in a really good headspace. I know he had a child, and that's obviously something last year you're dealing with while you're playing college football, and that's exciting now, and things are kind of going his way. And he played some good snaps for this team last year too, but now it's that next step, and I think he can definitely fit in. Not as a top 3 guy maybe yet, but he's like, maybe he's your 6th or 7th guy or 5th guy or whatever. But that you're going to need those guys to come in and not have that big drop off.
Yeah, he rotates in early, and the aforementioned, you mentioned Princewell. It's funny the dichotomy of the stories, right? We talk about Sherman and Judy, and I remember talking to Coach Rule a ton, and he'd said, getting in elite level shape, like they're big. They keep showing up, the hit your weight benchmarks, and elite level fitness, like that's a big thing. And conversely, we heard Coach Knighton on the opening day of press conference. The one thing that he said about Princewell was he did talk about his immense talent, but he talked about the consistency of doing it every day. Like, keep showing up. And it's just interesting that how even for the talented guy or the guy that has yet to break through, the main thing these guys talk about is to bring it every single day, right?
Yep.
The only thing Coach Rule wanted was a tough football team. So that meant fitness. What did everybody whine about in the OTAs? The conditioning and the fitness, right? Because it's easy to not get out of bed on some of those days, right? It's like, it's just amazing whether it's a success story or a what's holding them back story. The story, the narrative is still the same.
Yeah, and football is such a tricky game because let's say you have one really great play that everybody's like, oh man, you see that TFL, and then there's an okay play, you did your job, but then you had a wreck on the third of play in the sequence.
Yeah, Ty Robinson, Norman, Oklahoma, a couple years ago.
Yeah, it takes everything, like that really bashes whatever you did on the first or second play in a lot of ways. Like, you've got to level it out where, okay, maybe you do have that explosive play once every 4, but 2, 3, and 4 on that play chart are good. You did your job. Maybe you weren't you just did what you were supposed to do. And if you get that across the board, then you're a team that's really cooking. And it was interesting what you're talking about is, as you were saying that, I was thinking about John Butler the other day, and he was asked about Tommy Hill, and it was sort of a similar message of Tommy Hill can't just be satisfied that, okay, you've got draft stock now and you're, one of the better players at Nebraska. Don't fall into that trap. Like, where it's like, okay, that I've gotten to this point, that's nice, and settle. Like, you've got to keep pushing yourself. Like, I'm always going to be consistent, and okay, what's next for me? Like, I don't want to just be known as the guy who had a good EA Sports rating and then had an average season. I liked when he gave that answer about Tommy and just the push for consistency with him too, to be that guy. And then when you are that, you're one of the best players and everybody wants to follow you. That just comes with it then.
Ravi and I talk about Coach Butler all the time. And I said the analogy, and Ravi might be able to explain it better as he received the information. I said the thing about Coach Butler that I like, and it's no disrespect to Coop, because I liked Coop, especially the mentality that he brought and how he loves development. But I said the cool thing about Butler is he's coming in with a fresh set of eyes. So he doesn't have to, or he's not afforded the luxury, or he can't take into the account of if player X if he was a 4 and then now he's a 7, he can't say, oh man, he's come such a long way. Like, I'm glad he's at this point. Or if a guy was an 8 and now he's playing like a 5, it's like, man, this guy just doesn't want it. Like, what's going on with him? He can't get past the Coach Cooper thing. He only knows what he knows. So his baseline and the standard is the standard. Like, I think that's good for everybody in the room.
Yeah, I would think so. And it was interesting how he kind of spoke on, it seemed like when he first got here, it's not like he was avoiding guys. I didn't get that idea. But he had a line where he was like, I kind of want to let the football do some of the talking, basically. I'm paraphrasing. but he wanted to wait to get out there, and he's getting to know those guys within the room a lot better right now. And I know there were conversations prior to camp, but he definitely wanted to go out there without, I think, any preconceived notions or anything. And like, let's see what you have. And it is a clean sheet for everybody. And of course, the fascinating part of that room is you've got these sort of categories. We've talked about it a lot, but you've got those 5 or 6 guys who have played a decent amount of college football, or a lot. And then you got a ton of, true freshmen, second-year guys who they just haven't played yet. And those guys, I would think, are, all elbows out. Like, all right, I'm kind of on an even playing field with this person just by my year in class, for one. And now I have a new coach. That's another thing. That should excite any competitor to have that in front of you.
BC, you're spot on, as Ravi can attest to. Like, maybe privy to information. You're spot on with, I'll get to know you guys as people later. Trust me on that. Like, I'll get into that. But early on, this has got to be about football, because I need to work quick from a teaching standpoint. Like, so your read on that, like, he's actually said that to the players. So your read on that is 100% accurate.
Yeah, I was really impressed with him yesterday. It was 15 minutes where I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think there's a lot of coaches who could come in after they've had success for 10 years in the NFL, and there's a little bit of that sort of seeps out of them, if you know what I mean. Like, you kind of feel like that in the room, and there was none of that. It was just like really level, and I'm excited to be here right now. I did not come here for this to be a placeholder job. That's not the way I am. That's not the way I'm ever going to be. And I thought that was like one of the key lines in there from him. But just, as he talked through what you're speaking on, and he just had to put his head down every day. Like, he's over at Embassy Suites, and it's football right now. You walk over through the campus and you learn, and you don't think about, I got to know this or I got to know that by this point on August 15th. You just keep working every day. And then the next day you stack more on top of it. And he also said, I'm going to listen at first, and I'm listening, and I'm keeping my mouth shut actually in the coach's room. And then when I feel like I know, I've caught up and I know my stuff basically, then maybe I interject with some of the ideas I've had through my years, and we talked to Tony about that. So I just think he's had a really good process as he talked the fans and the media through his process, and I thought that was really good.
Yeah, there's some reverence, man. You got a Parker, you have a Rossi, you have a Tony White, you have a Jim Knowles. Like, I mean, those are formidable coaches on the defensive side of the ball in the Big Ten Conference. The Tosh Lapoys, this isn't some little kid league, right? I mean, there are some quality fellas that are recognized nationally as peers.
Oh, no question. And I think there's a great respect for Tony in that community, and it especially got built up last year too for those who didn't have it yet. That this guy is for real. And if you hear any of the players talk about Tony's scheme and just being in it, there's just like this love in their eyes for it. Like, they do just have great affection for his defense. And even Coach Butler the other day, he's coaching about every defense there is, I'm sure. But you could tell there was a line or two where there was like, man, this scheme has just some interesting parts for a secondary coach to dabble with, and it's a lot of fun. And obviously, he said, I'm a little biased to the 5 DBs out there. We have almost half the defense, so that's good. But Tony's defense, I think, not only do players look at it and say, man, I want to be a part of that, I want to play in it, recruits look at it that way. But I think a coach, even a veteran coach of 3 decades, like John Butler said, in life, you've got to have those moments where you're like, I want to try something new and motivate myself by learning this that I haven't done before, and what's this all about? And that's really good for your mind and soul, as we all know, whether it's football or anything. So I think he's enjoying that part of it.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, we talked about the versatility. I think John Butler talked about the versatility of that 3-3-5 defense. You've heard it from some of the players as well. Have you allowed yourself to start thinking about some of the wrinkles that we might see this year? Because I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think we got a pretty vanilla version of what Tony White's defense can be last year. Have you kind of allowed yourself to start wondering about what that could look like in year two?
A little bit here and there. I think of it on the base level that my brain can think at. I mean, I think of like how often they talk about all off season, what's been like almost number one besides takeaways. It's been 4-man rush, really. It's like getting home with that rush. And when I hear them speak on, we got to do this, this is our pursuit, it makes me think of what all that opens up that you can do if you're successful with that on other downs. And then I hear something like, a question like, okay, Jamari Butler's up to 260 now, and Cam's Lenard's put on 10 pounds. Would you play those two guys on the field at the same time? And you get an answer from T. Knight about how maybe that can happen now on earlier downs. And like, because guys have changed their bodies, there might be certain players on the field at the same time, especially up front, that we didn't see out there actually last year, or that were in niche roles. So, maybe Jamari Butler, it's a game changer that he can be out there more on certain downs, or James Williams. All these guys have really worked hard to shift their bodies to be Big Ten ready. I think James Williams still has a little ways to go, as he's at 250 now, but he's definitely made progress. And if you keep stacking up guys like that who put in the work in the offseason, who make themselves versatile for all these different scenarios, or the fact that like Nash now at 310, they feel like they can move him around the D-line in different spots. I think that's what plays in my mind to your question, is just like how those chess pieces can go on different spots on the board than we probably saw a season ago.
God, it's so cool to hear you talk about it, because I know I was telling Ravi a story how, Caleb was saying, hey, the guys that maintain their weight and got to their weight goals in strength and conditioning, Kristen had over for, they got their favorite meals, and they submitted recipes and stuff. And I said, there's something to celebrating those small victories, because it keeps young guys in the hunt. And he was quick to say, even the older guys too, and I dropped that in air quotes, when they start seeing the rewards in camp, like a Butler or a Cam Lenhart, who are now, what did I call them yesterday? Not two-way guys, every down guys. Mm-hmm. See, that's good for everybody else to see why those goals are important in the offseason, right? Why should Tommy Hill go from, 181 to 204, right? Like, what does that mean for your longevity and your stamina? When they start to see the practical application of it, of, let's say, your example of playing on early downs, see the next year during the offseason, and they have those little small victories, you're going to get more buy-in, because they're rewarding exactly what they say they're going to reward. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Jamari's a good example. He's kind of like what we're talking about with Tommy Hill. Like a young player in what you're saying could have looked at Jamari last season and said, man, I want to be like Jamari.
Yeah, that guy led us in Tiffles, right?
Yeah, you're right. You arrived to this point and all this stuff, and then you realize, you look at it like, oh, he didn't arrive. Like he made a step, and it was a really good one, but Jamari wasn't satisfied with it. He knows that he wasn't out there on these, certain plays, and he wants to be, and he's worked his body to get to that. So I think that has to fire up those young guys. Also, with the Teddy injury, Matt Rule comes into the room, and it's a 2-minute thing, just giving us the news about it. But, Gunnar Gatula's name comes up as like a guy, like, you're on the clock, right? Like, I'm not saying he's like the guy right away, but he's up there now, and he's been kind of hanging on the fringe, and he's a pretty young player in this program. And if I'm any other young guy at any other spot, I look at a situation like that and I say, man, it does change quickly. All this talk I've heard all offseason about, oh, you need 100 some guys to get through this long season they're going to play, and what we're aiming for 16 games at some point, you all better be ready. That could probably just feel like talk at some point in May. and then you actually see a specific example, an unfortunate one, albeit, but one still that happens where an injury occurs and you lose a main guy, and you're like, okay, I do see how all of a sudden this trickles down, and suddenly this guy matters, who's very young in the program still, and that could be me too. And I would have to think that lights something under you.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks, guys.